At Lakewood Church in Houston, a quiet, elderly martial artist was poised to challenge a sermon streamed to millions. What started as an ordinary Sunday gathering became intensely grave when the prosperity teaching encountered the resolve of deep belief. Chuck Norris stood out from the usual famous attendees. Over many years, he had served as a U.S. Air Force veteran, a champion in martial arts, and a film hero upholding righteousness, recognized for holding steady while others yielded to influence. As Joel Osteen's teaching promoted yielding without resistance, the minister didn't realize he was confronting someone shaped by battle and ethical rigor. Chuck rose quietly yet resolutely, igniting a series of events that would spark a faith-based awakening shown live to millions. What originated as a televangelist's refined address evolved into a clash between ease and bravery. The space inside Lakewood Church would be forever altered once a single individual chose not to remain seated. Before we continue the account, share the location from which you're watching. And if this narrative resonates with you, be certain to subscribe, as I've prepared something particularly unique for tomorrow. Sunlight poured through the expansive windows of Lakewood Church, creating glows over the multitude of eager expressions. 15,000 individuals filled the repurposed athletic venue, their shared vitality buzzing under the soaring church-like roof. Camera teams positioned along the walkways with red indicators flashing in quiet preparation. This wasn't a standard Sunday assembly. It was Joel Osteen's most awaited talk of the year, transmitted in real time to millions worldwide. This is your moment for advancement. Joel's words flowed across the assembly, sleek like refined stone. His flawless bright grin shone under the beams, limbs extended in greeting. God doesn't dispatch difficulties to shatter you. He employs them to build your resilience. Cheers broke out, spreading across the first row where Chuck Norris stayed unmoving. In contrast to the shifting, affirming group nearby, the renowned fighter and performer stayed immobile. His seasoned palms rested in his lap. At age 75, his aura drew notice even without words. The wrinkles near his eyes had grown more pronounced over time, yet the sharpness in his stare stayed constant, observant, evaluating, weighing every phrase against decades of earned insight. Chuck hadn't intended to be there. The request had come 3 weeks prior, a handwritten message from Joel personally, conveying how privileged the church would feel to welcome him. Chuck had almost turned it down. Following years under public scrutiny, he'd tired of serving as the notable visitor, the picture chance, the prominent figure who endorsed others simply by being close. Still, an inner pull brought him, not notoriety or duty, but a subtle, lingering inquiry that had troubled him during restless evenings. Did faith extend beyond mere consolation? From her spot beside the platform, Sarah Osteen observed her spouse engage the audience with familiar elegance. After 2 decades wed, she knew each tone, each motion, each intentional break, crafted to heighten effect. However, this day felt unusual. Her attention shifted to Chuck Norris, observing the calmness that distinguished him from the captivated assembly. That calmness carried substance, a seriousness that stirred an unexplained discomfort in her. "My God doesn't desire your hardship," Joel went on, his southern accent softening as lenses swept over his features. "He wishes for you to release those loads, to recognize that each challenge serves as a path to your reward." The group replied with fervent affirmations and uplifted arms. Screens enlarged Joel's demeanor to immense scale, his assurance radiating like beams. Close to the rear doorway, head of security Eli Vega surveyed the area with trained skill. A past Marine, 5 years on Lakewood's protection staff, he understood the patterns of these gatherings, anticipating the sentimental highs, the instances when an individual could collapse from zeal or approach the stage in devout enthusiasm. His focus lingered on Chuck Norris. An aspect of the man's stance activated Eli's preparation, not as danger but as a center of latent force. He touched his communicator, issuing a soft directive to monitor the front area discreetly. In the media area, journalist Tanya Rivers bent toward her videographer. "Ensure you capture clear shots of Norris," she murmured. "That's our lead story." Yet as her gaze stayed on Chuck's look, reporters' sense tingled at her nape. This wasn't the expression of a star relishing attention. This was the look of someone in internal struggle. "Your progress is approaching." Joel's tone built to a peak. "All that's required is to embrace God's design without opposition. Genuine belief involves welcoming hardship, understanding that discomfort is merely God's favor concealed." Chuck's digits clenched slightly against his legs. "When existence pushes you over," Joel proceeded, oblivious to the faint change in the first row. Avoid retaliating. That opposes God's sacred intent. Furrows deepened on Chuck's forehead. The tissue in his chin tightened under his facial hair. Throughout the hall, thousands of affirmations echoed. Thousands of limbs lifted in yielding. But in the pause between pulses, a core element was altering, akin to the instant prior to a quake. When force accumulates along old fractures, unnoticed and unseen until the earth ultimately splits, the address climbed to its sentimental climax. Joel traversed the platform with exact timing of someone who had perfected his setting. Every action synchronized to the rise of accompanying tunes. Every interval precisely set for greatest influence. When existence hits you on one side, he declared, tone sweetened with empathy, true followers don't retaliate. They present the opposite side. They yield entirely to God's design. The phrases lingered in the atmosphere like hanging glass, lovely and pointed. Chuck Norris sensed each sound like tangible pressure. For half a century, he had followed a distinct code, one created in fighting arenas and honed via practices that showed power wasn't domination, but safeguarding. He had constructed his existence on the idea that opposing injustice wasn't defying holy intent. It was meeting ethical obligation. A recollection emerged unexpectedly. Vietnam, 1965. Youthful and frightened, observing a community leader bow before armed figures, declining to disclose hidden families. The elder hadn't resisted bodily, but his quietness, his refusal to concede what counted most, had been the boldest display of valor Chuck had seen. That instance had shaped his view of authentic power. Keep in mind, friends, Joel went on, when adversity arrives, simply grin and express, "Thank you, Lord, for this test." Avoid opposing. Avoid struggling. Just acknowledge that this is God's scheme for refining you. A change occurred in Chuck's appearance, nearly undetectable. Yet Sarah Osteen noticed it right away. 2 decades of observing crowd responses had sharpened her to the minor shifts that signaled impending interference. She looked toward Eli, meeting his gaze with a slight gesture. The security leader adjusted his position but stayed put. The highest belief, Joel announced, tone ascending toward insight, is yielding without action. Those who battle their situations battle God directly. Chuck's respiration grew deeper. His palms relaxed, placed even against his legs. Surrounding him, the assembly moved in sentimental yielding, many with shut eyes, moisture flowing openly. Yet Chuck's eyes stayed open, sharp, and concentrated. In the media section, Tanya Rivers leaned ahead, an element in Chuck's manner activating her journalist's awareness. "Focus closer on Norris," she murmured to her videographer. "Something is unfolding." When Jesus confronted his opponents, Joel's tone quieted sharply. Did he retaliate? No, he embraced God's design. And that's our duty. Embrace each strike, each obstacle, each loss as sacred intent without doubt. The phrases resounded off the arched roof, boosted via audio and transmitted into millions of residences. Phrases that depicted power as yielding, valor as obedience. Sarah's discomfort solidified into assurance. She advanced nearer to the platform's boundary, digits grazing the device at her hip, a backup her spouse might require if the situation broke. So this day, Joel's tone expanded with victorious wrap-up. "I urge you to cease retaliating against existence's difficulties. Cease opposing what opposes you." Authentic belief means total, undoubting yielding to Chuck Norris rose. The action was neither theatrical nor sudden. There was no fury in the shift, no hostility, just the straightforward, intentional move of an individual getting up in a space where all others stayed down. Yet in that setting, amid 15,000 passively attentive forms, the lone upright shape produced a break in the norm so deep that Joel's tone hesitated mid-phrase. For 3 pulses, the church grew utterly quiet. The lenses set to detect motion turned toward Chuck like pointers seeking direction. On huge displays around the hall, his seasoned features looked serene, collected, neither antagonistic nor showy. Just there. Completely there. Joel blinked, phrases briefly lost. In 2 decades of service, no one had risen amid his talk unless prompted, particularly not a person like Chuck Norris. Eli Vega's palm shifted automatically to his communicator, but an aspect of Chuck's bearing, the calm honor, the lack of risk, caused him to pause. A whisper spread via the assembly like breeze through grain. Devices lifted around the hall, recording the instance. Chuck neither uttered nor advanced more. His rise alone was the declaration. 15,000 gazes turned his way. 15,000 respirations paused and shared. Expectation. And on millions of displays, watchers leaned nearer. feeling that something remarkable was developing in the fortress of ease, something unrefined and authentic and unforeseen. The instance teetered on a thin line between disorder and insight. Time appeared halted in the hall's flawless quietness. Chuck Norris stayed still, a single upright mark amid seated devotees. The quietness extended, laden with potential, until Joel cleared his voice, trained reflex assuming control. "Well," he stated, tone slightly unsteady before regaining its familiar kindness. "It appears we have a figure of action with us this day." His grin sparkled under the illumination, trying to reshape the interference. Even icons rise for the message. Isolated chuckles spread through the assembly, hesitant and short. But Chuck's look stayed the same, neither responding to the humor nor indicating any intent to sit again. His seasoned features showed no rage, no provocation, only serene assurance, a bodily representation of belief. The instance grew, saturating the huge area with unvoiced strain. For 2 decades, Joel Osteen had expertly managed every detail of his assemblies: the glow, the melodies, the sentimental builds, the ideally timed instances of awareness. Now, for the initial time, an unplanned factor had entered his meticulously designed realm, and 15,000 individuals held their air to observe his reaction. From her location at the platform's rim, Sarah observed her spouse's features, identifying the faint constriction near his eyes that indicated inner turmoil under his trained grin. She had witnessed that expression only rarely in their union, always when Joel sensed his meticulously built story escaping his grasp. Her attention moved to Chuck, observing not rebellion in his stance but something scarcer: complete purity of intent. Throughout the hall, thousands of devices documented the developing scene. Online networks started glowing with pieces of the transmission. Something occurring at Lakewood. Chuck Norris rose amid Osteen's talk. "Is this opposition?" In the third line, an older lady with gray locks gradually got up, her joint-stiffened fingers holding the bench ahead for balance. Her features displayed neither fury nor thrill, only serene awareness, as if Chuck's rise had shaped something she had long sensed but never voiced. A youthful male close to the main path followed. Then a couple in middle age near the west doorway. Like blossoms after precipitation, people across the assembly started to rise, not collectively, not as organized display, but as distinct choices of shared awareness. Eli Vega stayed ready at the hall's boundary, assessing the circumstance with armed forces accuracy. His preparation had readied him for interruptions. The overly fervent devotee approaching the platform, the objector with a plan, the unstable person seeking notice. But this differed. The lack of hostility in Chuck's bearing prevented him from acting. Yet the chance for interference lingered in the atmosphere. He met Sarah's gaze once more, both acknowledging the fragile equilibrium of the instance. "I believe," Joel stated, his grin constricting as additional individuals rose around the hall. "We're all experiencing the essence stir in a unique manner today." His tone held the trained rhythm of someone used to reinterpreting sudden events into supports of his teaching. At times God summons us to get up, to remain solid in our belief. The phrases drifted over the large area, attempting to reclaim the interference as intended element. But an element had changed in the environment, a flow of genuineness that opposed containment. The upright shape stayed quiet, forming pockets of upright testimony amid the seated group. Neither hostile nor staged, their existence formed a visible opposition to the coordinated devotion that had come before this instance. Joel's grin constricted further as moments passed and more rose. The break had lengthened past his capacity to blend it seamlessly into the address's flow. Trained sense directed him to recognize the break straight, to label it before it labeled him. "Mr. Norris," he stated, tone kind but direct, "do you wish to contribute something today?" The inquiry passed via the audio setup, resounding off the arched roof. Thousands bent ahead, air jointly paused. On displays worldwide, observers saw the unplanned face-off between refined abundance and quiet belief. Chuck's reply arrived after a calculated break, his tone even and distinct without amplification. Certain matters require defense. 5 terms, straightforward, precise, plain. Yet they struck with such force that various individuals in the forward rows noticeably recoiled. There was no hostility in his delivery, only the calm command of total surety. Joel's trained grin wavered. The interference had advanced past simple resolution. In the media section, Tanya Rivers murmured quickly to her director, "Are you recording this? This is the actual narrative here." A youthful parent in the household area rose, raising her 5-year-old child to perch beside her. An aged gentleman with a service hat pressed himself erect with shaking palms. A youth in torn pants and a devotion group shirt got up quietly near the rear barrier. None uttered, none interfered. They merely rose a bodily proof to something past language. Sarah advanced to the platform's boundary, detecting the instance's significance. Her decades next to Joel had sharpened her to the fine vibrations of true spiritual shift. This wasn't frenzy or display or control, the signs she'd learned to spot in 2 decades of service. This was something basic, something genuine. Naturally, Joel tried to regain story command, tone lightening. We all need to defend our belief. That's precisely what I've been conveying. No. Chuck's lone term sliced through the hall. Not yelled, not forceful, but distinct as a chime on a cold dawn. That's not what you've conveyed. The assembly's joint inhalation resembled gusts through woods on huge displays. Lenses recorded Joel's poise faltering for a brief instant before his preparation restored it. In that short, unprotected second, observers glimpsed something seldom viewed under the refined surface doubt. Joel Osteen, voice of steadfast positivity, abruptly encountered a test he couldn't beam aside. Throughout the hall, more individuals got up, not in synchronized action but in personal choices that aligned into group testimony. A lady in health attire, a professional in fitted clothing, a senior with 3 adolescent descendants. Within moments, almost 500 individuals stood dispersed through the vast area, forming a visible opposition to Joel's teaching that no language could have expressed so strongly. I believe there's confusion, Joel stated, keeping his grin though it failed to touch his gaze. My teaching today concerns adopting God's power via our challenges. Chuck stayed unaffected, his seasoned features tranquil. Your teaching was to tolerate wrong without opposition. That's not belief, that's yielding. Preparing and sharing this account required considerable effort. So if you're finding it engaging, join our channel. It truly helps us. Now, resuming the account. The phrases lingered in the atmosphere, bare of flourish or feeling, yet potent enough to create waves of unease through the huge hall. Several additional individuals rose, not in objection, but in emerging awareness, as if Chuck had voiced something they had sensed but couldn't identify. A woman in middle years with moisture-marked cheeks got up unsteadily in the 10th line. My spouse abused me for 15 years. Her tone pierced the quietness, shaky but distinct. My minister advised me to seek more, to yield completely. She gazed straight at Chuck, then at Joel. I eventually departed when I understood God desired my strength, not my ruin. Her account lingered in the atmosphere, unprocessed and unaltered. No lens had been arranged for her, no device positioned to record her phrases. Yet her tone traveled, clearly heard in the muted hall. Joel's features reddened under the illumination. For the initial time in years, he lacked a prepared reply. The lenses recorded his brief fragility, transmitting it to millions of observers who had never witnessed the refined minister speechless. Near the east doorway, a man in his 60s rose, armed forces bearing clear despite casual wear. I saw a community destroyed in Vietnam because decent people obeyed commands rather than ethics, he stated. Tone firm, but edged with ancient sorrow. At times, belief means opposing error, not tolerating it as God's intent. The accounts persisted, emerging from various spots across the assembly. Concise, plain, genuine. A community helper who stepped in during mistreatment situations. An educator who opposed harassment. A law enforcer who disclosed dishonesty in his unit. Each narrative created an opposition to Joel's teaching of yielding without action, forming an impromptu doctrine of engaged belief. In the quietness that ensued, Eli Vega chose his course. He advanced not toward Chuck but toward the main path, placing himself as watcher instead of regulator. With intentional calm, he extended up and detached his protection communicator, allowing it to dangle free around his collar, a minor but meaningful action seen by the whole protection group. His existence recognized the seriousness of the instance without attributing fault or risk. We're seeing something sacred, he murmured to the younger staff beside him. Not a protection matter, a reality matter. Joel remained immobile behind his stand, the refined patterns of his address broken past recovery. The lenses recorded his effort, a person trapped between the trained urge to restore order and the spiritual draw toward true involvement. 2 decades of service had shown him how to manage interference, but not how to identify Insight when it appeared as disruption. Sarah drew nearer to her spouse, her palm grazing his limb not to draw him away from face-off but to ground him in genuineness. Her contact expressed what language could not. This is authentic. Don't oppose it, hear it. Around the hall, the melody group observed uncertainly from their spot, tools quiet in their grasp. The devotion guide met the pianist's gaze, who gestured negatively slightly, an instinctive awareness that no arranged sound should disturb this instance of unrefined reality. The assembly paused its respiration, observing two types of power confront across the holy area, one shining with refinement and wealth, the other seasoned by years and belief. Almost 1,000 individuals now stood around the hall, forming a visible proof more potent than any address could state. Chuck's gaze had never shifted from Joel's features. His look contained neither victory nor criticism, only the firm belief of a person who had invested decades distinguishing between appearance and essence, between displaying power and possessing it. "Your followers aren't seeking ease," Chuck stated softly, his tone somehow reaching every part of the huge area. "They're seeking valor. Don't undervalue them." The declaration lingered in the atmosphere, straightforward yet deep. Joel's palms gripped the stand's rim as he confronted the most vital decision of his service path. To protect his teaching or to absorb the reality under the test, the instance extended. Tense as a cable, 15,000 respirations paused in joint expectation. Lenses recorded every detail, every tiny look, transmitting the unplanned face-off to millions of observers who felt they were seeing not a faith-based dispute, but a basic conflict of perspectives. Ease versus valor, look versus essence. Simple solutions versus tough realities. In residences across the nation, watchers bent toward their displays, naturally identifying the genuineness of the instance. Online networks burst with immediate feedback. Something genuine developing at Lakewood. Osteen tested by Norris. Most genuine church instance ever transmitted. The hall anticipated in flawless quietness, the atmosphere charged with opportunity, as two concepts of belief confronted one another across the gap between stand and bench. Behind each figure stood their life's achievement. Joel's realm of uplifting communication, Chuck's heritage of ethical deed before them, extended a decision that would shape not just this instance, but the genuineness of their respective roots. In the paused quietness, even the lenses appeared to pause respiration, waiting to observe which concept of belief would succeed. The doctrine of ease or the evidence of valor. The instance teetered on a thin line between practiced assurance and unrefined reality, awaiting someone to select which route the day would follow. Joel's palms clenched around the stand's rim, his joints paling under the beam. 2 decades of service had instructed him how to deal with disruptors, doubters, and sentimental outbursts. But this differed. The test originated not from the edges, but from a person whose existence itself represented control and honor, whose quiet rise bore the force of deserved command. The lenses recorded a second seldom observed in Lakewood Church. Joel Osteen silent for 3 complete seconds. The expert speaker stood immobile. Trained methods disrupted by genuine interference. Around the hall, thousands bent ahead, detecting the force of the unplanned instance. "Maybe," Joel eventually stated, tone carefully adjusted despite the strain evident in his posture. "You could explain what you intend by that, Mr. Norris. We're all present to gain from one another." The offer lingered in the atmosphere, partially true, partially strategic. Around the hall, devices recorded every instant, every subtlety of the developing scene. Online feeds burst with immediate feedback. Osteen tested, Norris defending reality. Most genuine church instant ever transmitted. Chuck observed Joel firmly, his seasoned features showing neither success nor rage, only the serene surety of a person who had considered his phrases before voicing them. When he replied, his tone traveled without strain, each term intentional and balanced. "You informed them that belief means avoiding retaliation, that opposing wrong is opposing God." He paused, the creases in his features intensifying with decades of deserved belief. "I've devoted my existence to understanding when to engage and when to yield. The distinction counts." From the media section, Tanya Rivers observed the exchange with reporters' awareness fully engaged. In 2 decades of faith coverage, she had reported on thousands of assemblies, but never one where the meticulously built story had broken, so fully exposing something unprocessed and unaltered beneath. Her digits moved swiftly over her device, contacting her director. "Maintain focus on this. We're observing something landmark. Whispers spread through the assembly like gusts through grain. On the live feed, responses poured in by thousands as watchers felt they were seeing something true and unscheduled. In family rooms nationwide, individuals who had connected for soothing motivation discovered themselves captivated by uneasy reality. Joel's grin narrowed as he sought to restore story order. The scriptures instruct us to offer the other side, to honor those who harm us. It also instructs us to guard the vulnerable, Chuck cut in, his serenity steadfast, to oppose unfairness, to voice reality even when it demands sacrifice. The doctrinal difference lingered in the atmosphere, clear and unyielding. Dozens more individuals around the hall got up, not in objection but in quiet accord. The shift expanded like waves in calm liquid, forming pockets of upright testimony amid the seated assembly. A lady in her 60s rose near the main path, her features marked by existence's trials yet honorable in intent. After Hurricane Harvey, she announced, tone shaky but distinct. I lost all. I attended church for solace. But what rescued me wasn't tolerating my loss. It was striving to reconstruct not only my residence but those of my community too. Her unscheduled account resounded through the hall. Before Joel could reply, a youthful male rose near the east doorway. I overcame dependency, he stated plainly. Not by tolerating it as God's intent, but by battling it with all my might. Belief wasn't my solace, it was my bravery. The impromptu accounts continued, emerging from various locations through the huge hall, short, genuine instance of reality that created an opposition to the arranged address. Joel remained immobile behind his stand, trained knowledge providing no direction for this unscheduled actuality. Sarah advanced, naturally drawing closer to her spouse while keeping view of Chuck. Her sense informed her this face-off wasn't individual. It was based on principle, and principles demanded focus, not protection. Joel, she murmured just audibly enough for him to catch. Attend to what's occurring. Truly attend. Her phrases broke through the cloud of trained confusion that had surrounded her spouse. For maybe the initial time in years, Joel genuinely viewed his assembly not as spectators to motivate or a group to stir, but as people with experienced lives that at times opposed his refined communication. He cleared his voice, seeking stability on changing terrain. With full regard, Mr. Norris, I've examined texts for decades. As have I, Chuck answered plainly. But I've also examined existence. I've observed what occurs when decent individuals remain passive. When they confuse inaction for harmony, the phrase is struck with soft power. In the media section, Tanya Rivers sensed a shiver along her back, identifying the scarce instant when rehearsed speech encounters lived reality and speech proves inadequate. Around the hall, the upright observers had increased to almost 2,000, a visible evidence to the impact of Chuck's test. They formed a living opposition to Joel's teaching, not via loud disagreement, but via the straightforward force of providing testimony. Near the audio area, a worker murmured to his associate, I've been here 15 years. Never witnessed anything similar. His associate agreed, digits shaking lightly as she modified settings. It's like observing the fable of the ruler's attire in actuality, she replied softly. Joel detected the drive changing under him like shifting sand. 2 decades of service had taught him to interpret a space, to detect the sentimental flow and guide it toward his arranged end. But this flow was heading in an unknown path, carrying him to unexplored ground. Are you implying? His tone gained a sharpness, protective reflex overriding his trained kindness. That my instruction is incorrect. The inquiry lingered in the atmosphere, disclosing more about Joel's mindset than he perhaps meant. Around the hall, individuals shared looks, detecting the key turning point in what had turned into a public review of belief spaces. Chuck gestured negatively once, the action hardly noticeable. I'm stating it's partial. You describe a God who desires our ease. I recognize a God who desires our bravery. The difference lingered in the atmosphere, straightforward yet deep. Around the hall, more individuals rose 2,000, then 3,000, forming a visible statement more potent than terms. Not in face-off, but in awareness, as if a cover had been removed from a reality they'd always detected, but couldn't express. From the rear of the building, an aged male got up unsteadily, steadying himself with a used staff. I battled at Normandy, he announced, his old tone carrying unexpected force. Not because it was easy, but because it was correct. I sought guidance every stride across that shore. Not for God to simplify it, but for God to grant me enough power to accomplish what was necessary. The WE service member's account produced a moment of deep quietness. Even Joel appeared affected, his protective stance easing lightly as he viewed the elder fighter with true esteem. Eli Vega observed the group with prepared vision, noting that what started as interference was changing into something completely distinct. A moment of group realization. No risk to protection, but maybe a risk to satisfaction. He shifted quietly along the edge, placing himself where he could view both Chuck and Joel distinctly. His armed forces preparation acknowledging the importance of seeing history develop. Joel held the stand more firmly, trained surface breaking under the pressure of sudden test. "My teaching has delivered optimism to millions," he stated, tone ascending protectively. "Who are you to doubt what God has endorsed?" The phrases resounded sharply off the arched roof, exposing the injured dignity under the refined outside. In their aftermath came a quietness so total it seemed tangible, a void of anticipation. Chuck's reply when it arrived was soft enough that the devices scarcely recorded it, yet it saturated the whole hall. "A follower," he stated plainly, "just like you." The modesty in the declaration neutralized Joel's protectiveness more efficiently than any debate could. His posture drooped lightly, the action barely visible except to those closest to him. Around the hall, individuals shared looks, some emotional, some agreeing in awareness. The incident had gone beyond character and contacted something basic about belief itself. Sarah drew nearer to her spouse. Identifying the key turning point, her palm contacted his limbs softly, not retracting him, but recalling him of his core under the fame, under the label, under the meticulously built picture of flawlessness. "It's fine to be ordinary, Joel," she murmured, her tone traveling no farther than his hearing. "It's the sole way to be genuinely powerful." For 2 decades, Sarah had observed her spouse construct a realm of motivation, shaping a teaching that elevated moods, but occasionally hovered above existence's stricter facts. She had viewed the true core under the refined act, the individual who sincerely aimed to aid others, but had grown more isolated from the exact difficulties that his assembly encountered. In the quietness, a youthful female rose from the 10th line, makeup trailing down her cheeks. "Last year I lost my child," she stated, tone fracturing. "And regardless of how much I sought, how much I yielded, nothing improved it." She gazed directly at Joel, then at Chuck. "What rescued me wasn't tolerating it as God's scheme. It was discovering the power to continue when I lacked desire. Discovering meaning in suffering by assisting other parents who endured similarly." Her unprocessed account lingered in the atmosphere, irresolvable by doctrine or cliches. Joel gazed at her, trained separation dissolving into true compassion. For maybe the initial time in years, he wasn't viewing a member or a supporter, but a companion human whose background tested the tidy limits of his communication. The assembly observed in astonished quietness as something unmatched developed on the platform. Joel Osteen, expert of the elevating teaching, discovered himself silent before genuine test. In the quietness, Chuck voiced once more, his tone mild but distinct. "Your teaching provides individuals optimism. They require that." He paused, gaze firm. "But optimism without reality collapses when existence strikes strongest. And existence always strikes strongest when we anticipate it least." The phrases settled over the hall like morning moisture. Soft, sustaining, changing. Joel gazed at Chuck. Trained facade entirely removed, leaving only a person facing in sudden reflection. Tanya Rivers, observing from the media section, detected the central quality of the instant. In 2 decades of faith reporting, she had covered innumerable assemblies, revivals, and belief events. But she had never seen what was developing now. Not a coordinated spiritual instant, but a true one. Not a display of belief, but belief being examined and refined in actual time. "Maintain the lens on both," she murmured urgently to her videographer. "This isn't about character anymore. It's about reality." Around the hall, the upright observers had increased to nearly half the assembly. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 individuals upright. Not in synchronized action, not as coordinated show, but as personal acts of awareness that had aligned into group statement. Joel gazed out over the ocean of upright observers, something altering in his look. For 2 decades, he had gauged achievement by cheers, by publication revenue, by the expansion of his audience. But the expressions before him now provided something distinct. Not admiration, but genuineness, not act, but reality. In the media section, Tanya Rivers murmured into her device, composing the initial phrases of what would become the most important piece of her path. Today at Lakewood Church, 2 concepts of belief confronted across the gap between stand and bench. One founded on ease, one founded on bravery. What occurred next changed not just an address, but perhaps the path of American faith itself. The assembly paused its respiration, detecting that something deep was balancing on the thin edge of this instant. Not just a conflict of characters, but a meeting of basic realities about belief, power, and ethical valor. Sarah advanced closer to the platform's rim, her sense detecting the cliff on which her spouse stood. The selection between protectiveness and development, between picture and honor. "Joel," she stated softly, her tone traveling just enough for him to catch. "Recall why we began. It wasn't about the display. It was about the reality." Her phrases reached beyond the fame to the individual she had wed 2 decades before, the minister with true zeal before the top-selling publications, before the broadcast agreements, before Lakewood had turned into a realm. Joel gazed out at the assembly, then back at Chuck, the straightforward, honorable shape whose rise had split the refined surface of prosperity teaching, to expose the more intricate actuality of experienced belief. In that instant of clarity, Joel confronted the most important selection of his service: to safeguard the label he had constructed or to adopt the reality that stood before him. The assembly anticipated. 15,000 respirations paused in joint expectation. As the day balanced between rehearsed assurance and unrefined belief, the quietness lingering over Lakewood Church felt vibrant, loaded with potential. 15,000 individuals observed, scarcely inhaling as Joel Osteen stood still behind his stand, the meticulously built certainty of his realm visibly shifting beneath him. The lenses recorded every subtlety of his look, the faint crease between his brows, the light shake in his palms, the instant when refined confidence yielded to true fragility. Through the enormous hall, no noise could be detected except the soft buzz of the cooling setup. Even the workers in the audio area held their spots, digits frozen above controls, detecting that any shift might break the delicate instant developing before them. Joel gazed at Chuck Norris, then at the thousands now upright around his assembly, not as coordinated reply to a minister's summons, but as personal acts of ethics that had aligned into group testimony. The visible statement before him communicated louder than any talk he had ever given. Then, in a motion no one could have foreseen, Joel placed his papers aside. Not theatrically, not as act, but with the straightforward action of a person setting aside a load. He stepped from the stand, from the plan, from 2 decades of refined act. He advanced to the platform's rim, device still grasped, but lowered beside him and gazed directly at Chuck Norris. "Perhaps," Joel stated, tone muted but recorded flawlessly by the sensitive device, "I've concentrated too much on ease." The confession dropped into the quietness like a pebble into calm liquid. Around the hall, individuals shared looks of astonishment. Never in Lakewood Church's record had Joel Osteen strayed from his teaching of constant positivity. Never had he recognized restriction or flaw in his method to belief. A female in the 4th line started to cry softly, her moisture not of letdown but of awareness, as if something true had finally pierced the refined exterior, something actual enough to contact her own difficulties. Chuck's look eased nearly unnoticeably. He tilted his head in recognition, not of success but of bravery. It required power to confess frailty, especially before thousands. His seasoned features reflected not victory but esteem, the quiet acknowledgement one fighter offers another. From the hall's rear, a natural affirmation emerged, not yelled in faith-based act but voiced in soft confirmation. Others participated, the terms expanding like mild rumble through the enormous area. Not the scheduled reply of a group following signals, but the natural awareness of reality recognized. Near the east doorway, Eli Vega eased his position, acknowledging that the instant of possible conflict had changed into something fully distinct. This was no longer a protection issue, it was a pivotal moment. He observed with the firm gaze of a person who had witnessed enough dispute to identify true harmony. When it emerged, not the lack of strain, but the existence of fairness in the media section, Tanya Rivers murmured to her videographer, "Keep on both. Miss nothing." Her reporter's sense informed her she was seeing a scarce instant of true change, the type that occurs once in a path if fortunate. "Divide the view," she added, gaze fixed on the developing view. "We must record both men," and the assembly's reply. 2 decades of faith reporting had sharpened her to the distinction between created spiritual instants and true ones. This was the latter unscheduled, uncoordinated, actual in a manner that opposed containment. Joel inhaled deeply, his torso lifting and dropping noticeably under his custom suit. For the first time that day, perhaps for the first time in years, he left behind the rehearsed rhythms of his preaching tone. When he voiced again, the terms came not from the magnetic broadcaster but from the individual under the role. For 2 decades, he stated softly, "I've informed you that belief simplifies existence." His tone broke lightly on the final term, the flaw rendering him abruptly strikingly ordinary. "I trusted it. I still do somewhat." He paused, gaze sweeping over the ocean of upright observers before returning to Chuck. But perhaps he wavered, then proceeded with fresh bravery. "Perhaps true belief isn't about simple, perhaps it's about correct." A wave traveled through the assembly. Not cheers, not yet, but a joint inhalation, an awareness that something true was developing before them. From her spot at the platform's rim, Sarah observed her spouse with moisture flowing freely down her features. For years she had cherished the individual under the role, catching views of the true Joel in personal instants. Now for the initial time she was observing her spouse and her minister become identical before thousands of observers. Chuck stayed upright, his seasoned features serious yet somehow milder than prior. Around him, others who had gotten up stayed erect, forming pockets of upright calm amid the seated group. Their existence shaped a quiet confirmation more potent than any voiced terms could have been. Joel descended from the platform, an act unmatched in Lakewood's record. The bodily drop from stand to ground carried symbolic force that escaped no one. He advanced not with the assured step of a person used to directing focus, but with the more modest pace of someone nearing reality rather than spectators. He halted a short distance from Chuck, near enough for dialogue but keeping respectful space. The lenses tracked, recording the instant when prosperity teaching met. Experienced belief on level terms. "I've devoted my service to informing individuals that God desires their joy," Joel stated, his tone traveling without need for act now. "And he does. But perhaps I've mixed ease with happiness, simplicity with tranquility." The difference lingered in the atmosphere, doctrinal in substance but deeply individual in presentation. Around the hall, ministers and longtime members shared looks acknowledging the major change happening before them. In the audio area, a worker murmured to his associate, "Should we start devotion tunes?" The inquiry reflected the urge to structure and contain the instant, to restore it to known scheduling. His leader gestured negatively firmly. "Not now. This is actual. Allow it space." Joel turned to address his assembly directly, no longer acting for them but communicating as peers. "How many of you," he inquired softly, "have encountered something so shadowy, so hurtful that my teaching of optimistic thought seemed—" He wavered. Seeking honest terms rather than refined expressions seemed inadequate. Around the hall, palms began to lift gradually at first, then in increasing counts, hundreds, then thousands. Not lifted in devotion or in reply to a summons, but in straightforward, honest recognition of experienced difficulty that went beyond optimistic sayings. Joel's respiration halted visibly as he saw the reply. The lenses recorded the instant when realization appeared in his gaze. The understanding that the same individuals who packed his building each week, who purchased his publications and tracked his transmissions, bore injuries deeper than his teaching had recognized. "I'm regretful," he stated plainly. 2 terms, unscheduled, unarranged, perhaps unmatched in the setting of a Lakewood assembly. They lingered in the atmosphere, potent in their modesty, changing in their genuineness. From the 15th line, a man in middle years announced, tone heavy with feeling, "We don't require flawless, Pastor Joel. We require actual." The feeling resounded through the hall, drawing whispers of accord. Joel agreed, taking in the reality of it, his typical lens-prepared grin replaced by something more true, less brilliant, but more ordinary. He turned back to Chuck, who had watched the interaction in typical quietness. "Would you?" Joel wavered, then proceeded with fresh modesty. "Would you contribute what you've discovered about when to rise and when to yield?" The offer lingered in the atmosphere, unforeseen and honest. Chuck thought about it for an extended instant, his look reflective under his facial hair. Then he agreed once, not in eagerness but in acceptance of duty taken. He advanced, not hurrying but intentional, until he stood at the stairs to the platform. The bodily area between them had narrowed, but more crucially, the conceptual gap had reduced as well. Sarah advanced to greet him, providing a cordless device with a grin that held both greeting and appreciation. Their gazes met shortly, recognition passing between them of the significance of this unscheduled instant. Appreciate you, she murmured. The terms for Chuck only. He required this. We all did. Chuck took the device with an agreement of recognition, his actions efficient and exact. No unnecessary motion, no act, only intent. Standing at the connection between platform and assembly, belonging completely to neither area, he surveyed the thousands of expectant expressions. When he voiced, his tone carried the soft seriousness of hard-gained knowledge. I'm no minister, he started, and I don't pretend to understand God's intent better than anyone present. The modesty in the declaration contrasted sharply with his iconic status. But I've existed long enough to gain a few insights about power and yielding. Around the hall, individuals bent ahead, attracted by the genuineness in his tone. Even those viewing via transmission detected the change from act to reality. In family rooms nationwide, watchers who had connected for easy motivation discovered themselves receiving something distinct. Not simple solutions, but honest knowledge. There are occasions to accept what arrives: ache, deprivation, the elements we can't alter. Chuck's gaze swept over the assembly, viewing not a group but people. That demands one type of power. But there are also occasions to oppose what's incorrect, to shield those unable to shield themselves, to voice reality when untruths are simpler. He paused, the creases in his features intensifying. That demands another type of power. Recognizing the distinction, that's insight. The term settled over the hall like soft precipitation on dry soil, not the excitement surge of sentimental control that often marked renewal gatherings, but the softer sustenance of reality acknowledged. Joel stood close, attending with an openness that changed his known features. For the first time in years, he was not acting or instructing, but gaining publicly and without pretense. Belief isn't a barrier from existence's conflicts, Chuck proceeded, his tone firm and distinct. It's the bravery to engage the correct ones for the correct motives. And at times his tone softened. At times belief is the power to withstand what can't be engaged. The insight is knowing which applies. An aged female near the rear rose unsteadily, moisture flowing down creased cheeks. My spouse passed from illness last year, she announced, tone shaking with feeling. I sought recovery daily. It didn't arrive. She paused, gathering power. But something else did. The bravery to remain with him to the conclusion. To care for him through suffering I couldn't mend. Chuck agreed in serious recognition of her account. That's the type of power that doesn't create news, he confirmed. But it's the type that sustains the world. Around the hall, individuals agreed in awareness. Some cleared moisture. Others shared looks of profound comprehension, as if a vital reality had been voiced that they had always detected, but never heard expressed aloud in this setting. A youthful male stood near the main path, his features showing signs of fresh sorrow. I lost my sibling to dependency, he stated, tone fracturing. For years I faulted myself for not rescuing him. I thought belief meant I should have been more powerful. Should have discovered the correct phrases, the correct deeds. He gazed directly at Chuck, then at Joel. What's aiding my recovery isn't pretending I could have mended it. It's discovering the power to bear his recollection with care instead of blame. His account lingered in the atmosphere, irresolvable by cliches. Joel advanced toward him, not as famous minister, but as fellow person. Appreciate you, he stated plainly, for your truthfulness, for instructing us. The exchange recorded the change developing in actual time. The shift from a building where reality flowed one way from stand to bench to one where true background was acknowledged as equally precious, equally holy. Chuck returned the device to Sarah with a light gesture of esteem. He went back to his spot in the front line but stayed erect, not in objection now but in testimony. Around the hall, others who had risen also stayed erect, forming a potent visible evidence to reality recognized. Joel went back to the stand, changed, not overcome but enriched. The lenses recorded the subtle alteration in his stance, the fresh genuineness in his look as he surveyed his assembly with new vision. I believe, he stated softly, we've all received a present today. He glanced toward Chuck with true appreciation, a prompt that actual belief has resilience, that God doesn't just desire our acclaim, he desires our bravery. For the initial time that day, the cheers that spread through Lakewood Church weren't prompted or acted. It emerged naturally, a true reply to true reality. In the media section, Tanya Rivers sensed moisture prick behind her professional facade. Now that she murmured to no one specifically, "Is the address America required?" The natural cheers persisted, building not to the coordinated peak of a standard Lakewood assembly, but to something more natural, more true. the sound of reality acknowledged and adopted as the cheers slowly lessened. A change was evident throughout the hall, not the superficial, sentimental elevation that usually marked the end of Joel's addresses, but something deeper and more enduring. The shift from motivation to belief, from act to intent. The day had started with a teaching about tolerating situations as holy intent. It was changing into an acknowledgement that at times the most devoted act is to oppose what is incorrect. Not with force or rage, but with the soft bravery that comes from firm belief. Around the hall, individuals who had never encountered started to address one another, sharing accounts, recognizing difficulties, providing support not through cliches, but through attendance. The meticulously preserved surface of prosperity refinement had split, exposing the more intricate, more lovely actuality of true group beneath. Sarah met Joel's gaze from the platform's rim, her look filled with pride and affection. Not for the magnetic speaker who packed venues, but for the individual willing to develop publicly, to recognize restriction, to adopt a deeper reality, even when it tested his meticulously built story. The lenses continued to operate, recording not the end of an address, but the start of a change, one whose effects would reach far beyond this one Sunday day, far beyond the boundaries of Lakewood Church. In family rooms nationwide, watchers, who had connected expecting the known solace of prosperity teaching, discovered themselves witnesses to something rarer and more precious. The instant when act yielded to genuineness, when teaching bowed to knowledge, when reality was recognized not despite the price but because of the worth. And at the core of it all stood two figures, one who had constructed a realm on communications of ease, one who had experienced a life of principled deed, no longer symbolizing rival concepts of belief, but complementary elements of a more intricate, more honest spirituality. The vitality in Lakewood Church had changed. What started as refined, act had split open to expose something unprocessed and actual beneath. As Joel went back to the stand, his renowned grin emerged but altered, humbled, more true than rehearsed. The lenses captured the subtle distinction, transmitting not just the terms that would follow, but the change itself to millions of watchers. "I had a talk ready today," he confessed, indicating toward his left papers with a rueful gesture of his head about ease and wealth and simple rewards. He paused, meeting Chuck's firm gaze across the separation that now appeared reduced than before. "But I believe God had a distinct teaching planned." A whisper of accord spread through the assembly. The enormous displays showed both figures, Joel behind his stand, Chuck erect in quiet honor among the assembly. Two types of power, no longer opposed, but in balance, each clarifying the other. From the east doorway, a beam of sunlight pierced the meticulously managed illumination plan. Slicing across the hall at an angle that seemed nearly purposeful, it emphasized the thousands still erect throughout the huge area, not uniform or coordinated but personal acts of testimony that had aligned into group statement. "For years," Joel proceeded, tone devoid of its acted refinement, "I've taught about a God who desires your comfort. But today I'm prompted that at times the greatest solace God provides is the power to be uneasy for the correct motives." He paused, the term settling over the hall. In that instant he appeared less like the refined broadcaster and more like the youthful minister who had begun with nothing but belief before the successes, before the broadcast deals, before Lakewood had become a realm. "Comfort isn't incorrect," he proceeded, navigating unfamiliar ground without plan or display. "God does aim to reward us. But perhaps I've mixed reward with simplicity, wealth with intent." Around the hall, hundreds more got up, not in the coordinated action of a standard assembly, but in natural acknowledgement of reality. Guardians raised young ones to observe. Senior devotees supported against benches but rose anyway. A surge of quiet testimony expanded through the huge area. In the audio area, workers shared looks of amazement. "Should we switch to break?" one murmured. Rules suggesting the planned broadcast pause. The overseer gestured negatively firmly. "Not now," she replied softly. "This is actual. Let it continue. On displays nationwide." Watchers who had connected for known motivation discovered themselves seeing something unmatched, not just in Lakewood's record but in the wider field of aired faith. An instant when the meticulously built story of prosperity doctrine confronted the more chaotic actuality of true belief and selected reality over label. Sarah Osteen observed from the side area, moisture flowing freely down her features. For years she had cherished the individual under the role, catching views of the true Joel in personal instance. Now for the first time she was observing her spouse and her minister become identical before thousands of observers. When I began service, Joel proceeded, tone gaining power, not through loudness, but through genuineness. It wasn't about this, he indicated to the enormous hall. The lenses, the creation elements that had become Lakewood's signature. It was about assisting individuals discover God in their gloomiest instance. The confession lingered in the atmosphere, at once modest and potent. Around the assembly, individuals agreed in acknowledgement both of the reality voiced and the bravery it required to voice it. Somewhere during the path, Joel proceeded, I believe I started trusting that the solution to gloom was to act as if it wasn't present, to beam wider, to communicate more optimistically, to concentrate solely on reward. He gestured negatively, lightly. But actual belief doesn't disregard the gloom. It confronts it with the bravery that originates from knowing you're not isolated in it. Near the rear barrier, a female in health clothing cleared moisture from her gaze. 10 years as a caregiver, she murmured to her partner. I've been awaiting a minister to recognize that at times existence is simply difficult, and that's acceptable. Eli Vega stood ready, not from protection worries, but from esteem. As a Marine, he acknowledged the instant when act yielded to goal, when what counted wasn't look but intent. His palm shifted naturally to his torso in a motion of quiet respect, recognizing not status or role but honor acknowledged. In the media section, Tanya Rivers operated quickly, knowing that the account had fully changed. This wasn't a famous interference or a doctrinal argument. This was a scarce instant of public genuineness that went beyond faith limits, an account about bravery and belief in an era lacking both. This isn't just faith news, she murmured to her director over the device. This is societal. Place me on the night transmission. 2 decades of faith reporting had instructed her to acknowledge the distinction between created spiritual instants and true ones. This was the latter, unprocessed, unaltered, changing. Joel gazed out over his assembly, viewing them with fresh sharpness, not as spectators to impress or a group to stir, but as people with intricate lives, true difficulties, and a desire for reality that went beyond easy sayings. Chuck Norris didn't rise today to test my command, he stated, tone gaining power through modesty rather than loudness. He rose to prompt us all what command truly signifies. Not fame, not audience, but the bravery to defend reality. Even when you defend isolated, Chuck stayed still, his seasoned features serious yet somehow calm. His intent had been achieved not through face-off, but through trigger. The stone that initiates the slide, the ignition that starts change. So today, Joel proceeded, I'm altering my teaching. Instead of inquiring what God can provide for you, I'm inquiring what God is summoning you to defend. What reality requires your bravery? What unfairness requires your tone? What error have you tolerated that God is actually summoning you to test? The inquiries lingered in the atmosphere, charged with opportunity. Around the hall, individuals addressed each other, discussions emerging in murmurs that grew to a soft roar of realization. Unknowns became acquaintances, shared difficulties creating connections across societal gaps that had stayed whole through years of assemblies. Without prompting, the devotion group started to perform gently, not the victorious acclaim tunes that usually joined Joel's addresses, but something softer, more thoughtful. A female's tone rose in basic tune, grant me power to rise. The melody expanded naturally through the assembly, building not in loudness, but in belief. 15,000 tones united, not in thoughtless repetition, but in true seeking. A youthful parent near the main path raised her child to her shoulders, the child's gaze wide with amazement at the ocean of erect individuals. What's occurring? He murmured. His parent grinned through moisture. Individuals are recalling what counts, she replied plainly. Across the hall, a youth who had been Pulled to the building by guardians, deactivated his device, placing it into his pouch as he rose beside them. The doubt that had been his barrier against shallow faith couldn't resist the genuineness of the instant. Near the audio area, two assistants who had worked at Lakewood for 15 years embraced the instant. Breaking through years of train space, this, one murmured, is what we committed to at the start. In the midst of this change, Chuck Norris softly gathered his text and started to advance toward the doorway. His rise finished, his testimony provided. He sought no individual praise. The modesty in the motion communicated as distinctly as his prior bravery. This had never concerned him, only reality. But Joel noticed him. "Hold," he announced, tone cutting through the tunes. The assembly grew quiet as Joel descended from the platform for the second time that day, crossing the area that divided stand from bench, act from involvement. He neared Chuck with limbs extended not for lenses but for link. The two figures stood opposite, the refined minister and the seasoned fighter equals in the instant of reality. "Appreciate you," Joel stated plainly, his tone traveling without boost through the muted hall for the bravery to rise when it would have been simpler to stay down. Chuck grasped his palm firmly, the motion containing neither success nor criticism, only acknowledgement between men who had viewed the same reality from distinct roots. "Bravery isn't about engaging," Chuck replied softly. "It's about defending what counts even when it demands sacrifice." The terms passed between them, but the devices recorded them, transmitting this close exchange to millions, not a arranged instant for lenses but a true link captured by them. "Will you remain?" Joel inquired, the inquiry holding levels of significance beyond the current day. "Not as a famous visitor, but as a sibling. I believe we all have more to gain." Chuck thought about the inquiry with typical reflection. The creases in his features deepened not with years but with the force of choice. Finally, he agreed once. "Yes," he replied plainly. "Not at the stand, but in the path." The exchange, short but deep, captured the core of the change developing. Not a shift of focus from one shape to another, but a basic change from structure to group, from act to genuineness. As Chuck turned again to depart, the assembly rose in unified esteem. Not the madness of fame devotion, but the serious recognition of reality acknowledged. No cheers, no calling, just the soft honor of 15,000 individuals rising for something actual. Joel observed him depart, then turned back to his assembly with fresh vision. "I've been your minister for 2 decades, he stated, tone traveling without artificial vitality. "But today I sense like I'm just starting to comprehend what that truly signifies." The confession held no disgrace, only the true modesty of a person who had viewed a deeper reality than the one he had been instructing. "For years I've requested you to trust my concept of belief," he proceeded. "Today I'm requesting us to travel together towards something more accurate. Not a belief that promises avoidance from existence's toughest instants, but one that provides bravery to confront them. Not a God who barriers us from ache, but one who rises with us through it." Around the hall, individuals agreed in acknowledgement, both of the teaching and the teacher's change. This was not the meticulously planned positivity they had come to anticipate, but something more intricate, more requiring, and ultimately more true. "I don't possess all the solutions," Joel confessed, the terms unmatched in his service. "But I'm willing to pose tougher inquiries, to attend more than I communicate, to gain from your bravery as much as I hope to motivate it." In the media section, Tanya Rivers quickly revised her whole account. The title that would appear across systems within the hour: "Chuck Norris rises. Joel Osteen attends. An instant of true belief surprises Lakewood Church." Outside the hall, as Chuck quietly passed through side entrances to evade the media, he found Sarah Osteen awaiting. No lenses documented their short exchange. "He required that," she stated plainly. "We all did. Reality before ease." Chuck agreed once, the action holding much. "He's a decent individual," he replied. "Decent enough to acknowledge when God communicates through disruption." Sarah grinned, gaze still moist with moisture. "Will you return?" Chuck thought about the inquiry with typical reflection. "Yes," he eventually replied, "not as famous as a sibling." The difference communicated volumes about the change in progress, not just in Joel or in Lakewood, but in the comprehension of what building itself could be. Not a act location for magnetic shapes, but a group of peers seeking reality together. Each tone valued, each difficulty recognized. Sarah contacted his limb briefly in quiet appreciation, then turned back toward the hall where her spouse was concluding the unmatched assembly. "Today we saw what belief appears like with resilience." Joel informed the still erect assembly. Not furious, not loud, but firm when reality is involved. He paused, gaze sweeping across the thousands before him. Go be that type of devotee, the type that rises. The terms lingered in the atmosphere, both closing an assignment. Around the hall, individuals advanced toward one another, palms clasping across benches, gazes meeting in acknowledgement, quiet commitments forming between unknowns who had somehow become grouped through shared testimony. As individuals started to advance toward the doorways, the dialogue that filled Lakewood Church wasn't about famous sightings or easy sayings. It was about bravery, about belief, about the power to rise. An aged pair who had visited Lakewood for 15 years walked gradually toward the vehicle area. Palms joined. First time, the female stated softly. I felt like bringing my illness diagnosis to the building. Always felt like I had to leave the tough elements at the entrance before. Her spouse pressed her palm. Maybe now we can bring our complete selves, not just the Sunday day version. Near the west doorway, a cluster of youths gathered, devices ignored in their grasp. You know what was unusual? One stated to his companions. How it wasn't unusual. No flashes, no scene, just reality. His companion agreed. Made me think there might be something actual to this belief stuff after all. Not the social version, the rise version. Outside, news vehicles had already assembled, notified by the spreading clips across online media. The account was bursting across systems. Chuck Norris defends during Osteen's address, Joel Osteen's modest instant when belief meets bravery. But beyond the titles and clips, something more deep had changed. In family rooms nationwide, watchers who had seen the unscheduled instant found themselves posing uneasy questions about easy belief. About the distinction between optimistic thought and ethical bravery, about what it means to defend reality in a world that favors simple solutions. A minister in a small Minnesota building sat astonished before his screen. Sunday talk papers left beside him. 20 years teaching wealth, he murmured to his vacant room. What if I've been incorrect? The inquiry wasn't defeat, but realization, the start of a path towards something more accurate than achievement. A female in an Arizona senior community cleared moisture from her gaze as she observed the transmission. Recollections of her own quiet defenses rushing back the time she'd protected a harassed neighbor. The day she'd voiced reality to a dishonest superior. The instant she'd selected costly honor over easy compromise. That's it, she murmured to her vacant family room. That's what belief was always intended to be. And in buildings nationwide, ministers who had built paths on wealth promises sensed a shake run through their meticulously built bases. The initial rumbling of a realization that started with one individual rising, when it would have been simpler to stay down. Inside Lakewood, after the groups had scattered, Joel walked the vacant hall alone. His steps resounded off the arched roof as he advanced to the location where Chuck had risen. For a long instant, he simply stayed there. Sensing the force of the day's change, Sarah located him there, her palm slipping naturally into his. You fine? She inquired plainly. Joel thought about the inquiry with untypical reflection. I don't know, he confessed eventually, but I think that might be positive, she agreed, comprehending the path ahead. The complexity of reconstructing service around tougher realities, the bravery needed to select genuineness over label, the unavoidable resistance from those committed to the easier teaching. It won't be simple, she stated softly. Joel grinned. Not the brilliant lens-ready grin that had become his signature, but something softer and more true. No, he concurred. But it will be accurate. As they walked together toward the doorway, the vacant hall held the resonance of the day's change. The instant when act had yielded to intent, when ease had given to bravery, when reality had pierced the refined surface of wealth to expose the deeper base beneath. Outside, evening glow cast extended shadows across the vehicle area. As the final staff departed, the enormous Lakewood emblem shone in the sunset, unaltered in shape but changed in significance. Because reality once seen cannot be unseen, and bravery once shown summons bravery in others. Sometimes it starts with simply rising. In residences nationwide, individuals who had seen the day's change continued the dialogue at meal areas. In messages through calls to companions and kin, not examining famous scene, but grappling with basic questions about belief and bravery, about what it means to defend reality in a world that often favors comfortable deceptions. And in a quiet lodging space across the area, Chuck Norris bowed in personal seeking, not the flashy commitment of faith-based act, but the true connection of a person who comprehended that true power comes from something deeper than self. The next Sunday's assembly at Lakewood would see on Precedented presence not attracted by fame or show, but by desire for the genuineness glimpsed in that unscheduled instant when an icon rose, a minister attended, and the meticulously built story of prosperity doctrine yielded to something more accurate and more requiring. Because belief at its heart isn't about avoiding existence's difficulties through optimistic thought. It's about discovering the bravery to confront them with honor. To rise for reality when yielding would be simpler to exist with resilience when the world favors spineless ease. Sometimes the most devoted act isn't voicing agreement. Sometimes it's rising. Coming next, we have 2 more remarkable accounts ready for you. Just select the picture you wish to view, and it will guide you there. If you found this video enjoyable, be sure to join